here in Western Australia. My name is Steve Webb. I'm the chair of the West Australian Health Translation Network, and it's an enormous pleasure to welcome everyone to this most important webinar.
Hey, how are you? Good. How are you? Good. Late to a meeting.
I'll just start by making an acknowledgement of country.
Gosh.
The WAHTN CCI program acknowledges the Aboriginal people of the many traditional lands and language groups of Western Australia. We acknowledge the wisdom of Aboriginal elders, both past and present, and pay respect to Aboriginal communities of today. And also important to acknowledge those with lived experience. We acknowledge the importance and expertise of those with lived experience, of the lived experience voice of health consumers, carers, and communities. We recognise their involvement in making a difference in informing and supporting health research and impacting the health and well-being of our communities. We have three speakers today who will contribute to today's webinar. Today's topic is of the utmost importance. We're here today to launch the new National Health and Medical Research Council statement on consumer and community involvement in health and medical research. This is a statement of enormous importance. Perhaps the two major reasons that it is so important are, firstly, and most importantly, those who may be asked to participate in or be affected by the conduct and outcome of research have an inalienable right to be engaged and involved in that research. And involvement in that research means throughout the research process, from ideation and conception all the way through to reporting, dissemination, interpretation, and implementation. But secondly, high-quality consumer and community engagement vastly improves research. Research is more likely to be successful, more likely to be feasible, and more likely to have impact when there is high-quality consumer and community engagement. And those relationships must be absolutely respectful, constructive, trustworthy, and transparent. It's a great pleasure to introduce the three people who will speak today. Firstly, Anne McKenzie was one of, if not the very first, consumer advocate in Australia in health and medical research. She's been doing this for more than 3 decades, has trained thousands of consumers and researchers, acted as an advisor and consultant to research organisations and policymakers across Australia. Her contributions are legendary. She was appointed Order of Australia in 2015 and a recipient of the NHMRC Biennial Award for Consumer Engagement in 2021. She's a member of the NHMRC-MRFF Consumer Advisory Group. After Anne has presented, Deb Langridge will present. Deb is the lead of the West Australian Health Translation Network's Consumer and Community Involvement Program. She's a member of the NHMRC Research Committee, which is the NHMRC principal committee that plays a key role in setting policy at the NHMRC, which flows through to all aspects of research and research activity in Australia. She's also a member of the NHMRC-MRFF Consumer Advisory Group and is chair of the WA Consumer and Community Involvement Community of Practice. And lastly, it's a pleasure to introduce Susan Hayes, who will manage the question element of today's webinar. Susan's a very experienced consumer has been involved in informing research with the CCIP program at WAHTN, and also reviews grants with the Cancer Council of Western Australia and the Future Health Research Innovation Fund. Just noting that today's webinar will be recorded and available for sharing after the meeting is finished. And Anne, it'd be fabulous now to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'll just share my slides. Thanks for that introduction, Steve. So I don't need to say any more about me or why I'm here. And also I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're all meeting. As Steve said, we're in Perth in Western Australia on the lands of the Noongar Nation, and to the many people across the country that are here today. So I would just like to give a really quick overview of where today the statement that was just recently released has come from. In 2002, the first statement was made as a result of the Consumers Health Forum and consumers here in Western Australia at the Health Consumers Council making a submission to the Wills Review in 1998 to say that consumers should have more of a say. And that resulted in 2002, the NHMRC and Consumers Health Forum put out the first statement. Then in 2005, a framework was put out for to help researchers work with consumers to implement involvement. And there were a series of case studies from across the country, and I was very fortunate to be able to share what was happening here in WA at the time. So I was at that time working at UWA and the Kids Institute, and so it was really great to have input. Then in 2013, NHMRC established the first Consumer Advisory Committee, and one of the key things they wanted to do was to revise the 2002 statement. And so there was a process started in 2013, which again resulted in the 2016 statement being published. So then that stayed in place until 2022, when the National Health and Medical Research Council and Consumers Health Forum held an online workshop to talk to people across the country. Almost 200 people attended that workshop to say the statement needs reviewing, times have changed, and people need support about how to do it. So that then that sort of resulted in AHRA, the undertaking a review in 2024, and the Kids Institute, Research Institute of Australia, undertaking a roundtable process across the country in 2025. So all in all, when you read this statement, it's really reassuring to know that 1,250 people from across Australia have provided feedback into this latest statement, and that is researchers, people from research organisations, consumers, community members, a whole range of stakeholders. So, I feel very reassured that people have had lots of opportunities to have a say, and the final draft was reviewed by all major committees at the NHMRC, and as we know, it was published very recently. So just quickly to talk about the AHRA consultations in 2024, you can see where they were held across Australia. They had 22 in-person and online workshops, which were attended by 440 consumers and researchers, and at the same time, they had a concurrent survey, and they had 102 responses. And feedback from those consultations and the survey fed into the draft statement. So one of the things that it says in the report was the feedback included an expectation from people who'd attended the workshops that the revised statement would strengthen the uptake of meaningful consumer and community involvement. And concerns were raised that implementation information was important to support the uptake. Sorry about that. The report from, as I said, fed into the draft statement. Now, the draft statement then, the NHMRC put out a tender for some organisations across the country to run a series of roundtables to provide input onto the draft statement. And the Kids Institute of Australia successfully tendered, and they ran a series of consultations in 2025. And this was done in collaboration with 10 partner organisations that we have been working with for many, many years. And I have to say how fabulous it was that they were involved, and in particular, Health Consumers Council of WA and Health Care Consumers of the ACT. So again, a good mix of people running those roundtables. There were 25 roundtables held in every state, and 497 people attended, including leaders from First Nation communities. There were 7 virtual sessions and 18 in-person sessions. So one of the things that was said from that was the report. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to go back if I can. Sorry about that, Steve and Deb. I just want to tell you the report of that. The roundtables said very emphatically that stronger language was needed, and to remove the idea that involvement is optional. It's good to have, not that it must happen. So the other thing that came out loud and clear from those roundtables was there is a lack of funds available for early involvement, particularly for early career and mid-career researchers, and the lack of funding from a national perspective, that training had to be provided for researchers and in another way for consumers by the organisations that were doing it, rather than there being central funds available to do that. So they were really, really strong messages. So moving on to what's new in this statement, and I'm really pleased to say that consumer and community involvement is no longer a nice to have. It's everyone's responsibility, and that means right across the board. It's not just about consumers knocking on the door saying, can we have a say? Stronger language is being used, and words like should, could, may, and recommend have been removed. The statement requires involvement to be embedded as an essential part of research across all stages and all types of research, and it's to be implemented early and at the highest possible level. It's a pretty strong message about the importance of consumer and community involvement. Other inclusions in this new statement is there's a series of case studies highlighting a range of good practice involvement from across Australia, and I'm particularly proud to see one of them is from the work that's been done by Kath and Greg Hughes following the death of their son Riley a long time ago, and that fabulous work that they've done is in there. So please take time to have a look at those fabulous stories that are there. The Kids Research Institute Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander research standards have been included, and these were developed by the Kalunga Aboriginal unit at the Kids Research Institute, and it's really great to see some guidelines available there. There are shared roles and responsibilities for multiple people involved in research, and there is support and resources to embed consumer and community involvement in research. So there are values and principles in this statement. There are 6 core values that underpin effective consumer and community involvement, and each value has a range of principles to provide guidance on how to embed them into your research. I just like to look at the second principle, and that is the respect for lived experience. Recognising this as being equal to the scientific knowledge is a massive step for this country. In practice, research will be shaped by both science and lived experience. It says emphatically that consumers will be paid and they will be co-authors and co-presenters at conferences. It also talks very clearly about sharing power and respecting the rights of consumers to influence research that affects them. I see this as an enormous change and one that will provide consumers and community members confidence to find their voice, to use their lived experiences to contribute to your research. And of course, there's the others, but this is one that I think is, you know, a fabulous inclusion. There are clear roles and responsibilities that provide guidance for involving everybody that's involved in it: consumers, consumer and community organisations and members, researchers, research institutes and research funders. So, you know, there's really, you know, they're really clearly laid out. I'd just like to highlight the roles for consumers and community members, and that it says they will be involved across all stages and types of research. They will be required to follow policies and processes of the organisation. They will influence decision making, and that can be done through something like priority setting processes. And, you know, to give people a voice to say what's important to them and what should be research. There's an opportunity for them to represent the perspectives of wider consumer organisers and groups rather than just their own individual experience, and that they should take leadership roles as chairs of advisory committees, being named CIs or AIs on grant applications, and sometimes to lead the research. So it's important to remember to build, you know, build your way to success, build capacity for consumers and community members to be able to contribute effectively to your research. That's not going to happen without you working together to ensure that happens. Strong relationships are vital to consumer and community involvement. People need access to training, information about ongoing support, and of course, we've already talked about honorariums because people will be paid. So I would say to you, talk early and often to consumers, recognise their contributions to your support. And, you know, I just want to say to everybody, consumers and community members will add value to research, and it will be even more difficult to obtain funding without demonstrating how consumers and community members are involved in your research. Thank you.
Okay.
Honey.
Okay, now I can. Right, sorry about that. We were having problems unmuting me, which is funny in itself for those who know me well. Anyway, there you go. Thanks, Anne. It's fantastic for you to have given that overview of some components of this consumer statement, which is amazing, and the history is outstanding. I am able now to follow on from Anne speaking from very much an overview and highlighting some consumer perspectives, to now talk a little bit more about responsibilities for researchers, institutions and funders, because the statement, as Anne has made clear, outlines roles and responsibilities. So no longer can people make it make the reference that, no, this doesn't relate to me, that's somebody else's responsibility. And there is now a shared expectation from the broad national research sector that roles and responsibilities will be understood and then put in place. One thing to mention, as Anne in her in the overview of how this new statement was developed, is that the roles and responsibilities for researchers, institutions and funders were actually developed in consultation and engagement with researchers, institutions and funders. So there is ownership across the board. The engagement process and feedback process involved anyone and everyone at a number of stages throughout. So what I will speak about have come from all of you, which was a great point of difference and change in the adaptation and the development of this statement. First of all, there are lots that are combined roles and responsibilities for researchers, institutions and funders. Firstly, that shared collaborative process, that involvement is alongside with and in partnership. It's a collaboration of all of the different pillars of expertise. So expertise from researchers, expertise from clinicians, and then that third pillar of expertise of people with lived experience. And that it's not a one opportunity thing. It occurs at all stages of the research cycle, as Anne has continued to reinforce, which is important. And also all types and styles of research as well. Involvement is not a one size fits all. And so there are ways to be able to tailor the way researchers and institutions can involve consumers as well as funders to fit the style and the setting of research. It's also an expectation that in research being conducted and or in applications, that involvement is visible. So you don't have to look hard to actually see it. It's one of the significant criteria of a project or of an application, and that it's authentic. Gone are the days where you can say, oh, if I'm funded, I'll then think of involving consumers, or that near enough is good enough token style of involvement. It's quite clear now from the statement, but also in its application across into the funding setting, that especially from an NHMRC or an MRFF setting, that the expectations have changed. And so it's about understanding what those expectations look like. Importantly, and this has been something that's been reinforced a number of times throughout the statement, that involvement needs to be safe and it needs to be valued. And so when anybody is working together with people with lived experience, and people with lived experience are working with researchers, that it's done in a safe, a respectful and a valued way. So the different perspectives of involvement and expertise are valued and encouraged through that relationship and developing a collaborative approach. Another combined responsibility is about an investment to build capacity. There is a responsibility for researchers to understand, to seek training. And I'll talk a little bit about where you can find opportunities for funding and resourcing in a minute. So researchers need to be doing that. Consumers need to be doing that. Institutions need to now understand that with expectations from funders, but also best practice research, that researchers understand not only what involvement looks like, but how it's done, that there is a responsibility to provide an environment to train, for training, whether or not that's e-courses, it might be masterclasses, it might be resources and professional development. But there is an investment that is required from researchers, institutions and funders. Funders are now also recognising the need not only in the funding application process for panel members to be trained, but also an expectation that researchers and research teams, including consumers, have got an understanding and a capacity when it comes to consumer and community involvement. Embracing the responsibility to budget and resource for involvement is something that, again, and Anne has mentioned, it was one of the main themes that was screamed across from the opportunities of the review of the 2016 statement, together with the development of this new one, about the need for dollars for training, but also in that pre-award, in that the very initial stages of developing an idea and a concept. How can that happen, especially where researchers may not have dollars? So understanding what that responsibility looks like, which I'll talk about in just a minute in terms of implementation. And then the last shared responsibility really relates to that you need to start thinking about this now. It doesn't have to happen overnight. There's not an insistence that as of next week, everything will be in place, but there is an expectation that researchers, institutions and funders will be beginning to understand what does the new statement mean to them, and then plan about how to go about doing that. In terms of support and resources, I just want to make a very quick mention that there are two parts to the consumer statement. This is the second part. It's a support and resources section that has come about because of the feedback received. One of the main sources of support and resourcing is the Health Research Hub, and it's meant to be the next step for people to go to, regardless of who you are in the research sector, to find out what next steps can look like, where there are resources available and training. Together with the hub, though, for those within WAHTN CCI program, we have e-courses, masterclasses, tailored training. The Kids Institute run lots of training for their teams. Curtin University and Curtin Involve have an amazing consumer training in research program called CREST, all in capitals, CREST. So there are lots of places where you can go to find out what support can look like and training can look like. For consumers, within the CCI program, there is no charge at all for training, as well as if you are a WAHTN partner and a researcher and or institution. Again, that's part of the support that we provide. Just quickly now, skimming through in my time remaining, looking at what does implementation look like? So what does the turning the theory of the statement into practice look like for researchers? Firstly, that involvement matches the project. It needs to be tailored. It's not one size fits all. Again, that visibility and an intention to build the capacity, not just a view of a researcher, but a responsibility for you and your research team and consumers who are working with your research team as well. There is an opportunity to showcase the integrity of the research project by being able to showcase a safe and a valued environment when you are working and collaborating with consumers, because it is now identified as an essential criteria for research integrity, as well as remuneration and honorariums. That's a no-go area in terms of compromise. It's a definite must-do moving forward. Commitment to communicating and collaborating well. It absolutely is an essential component of researchers for implementing great opportunities of involving people, speaking, communicating and regularly and well. Planning ahead absolutely needs to be part of a researcher's plan, along with all of the other components of planning a research project, and because it needs to be authentic. So it is very visible if it's a last minute, last dash kind of who can I find as a consumer to add to my research application grant. That is very visible. So you now need, the expectation is you will plan ahead and know. And if you're not sure about what involvement looks like, that's where the WACCI program, but also all of your other institutions and research officers can guide you to finding out how to get that support. And support is available. We are seeing for researchers, and it's a significant barrier to next steps. If you know you need to do this and you want to do this, but how do you do it if you don't have the dollars? There are a lot of institutions now, and within WA, a year and a half ago, the FHRI Fund piloted a CCI support program that again provided dollars in the lead up to developing a grant application. Universities and research institutes are also making available seed funds or involvement banks for researchers to apply through an expression of interest for a small amount of dollars, or even for a community conversation. So if you're a researcher, go to your research office and ask what the support looks like to be able to do meaningful involvement. And if there isn't any support available, ask why, because again, it's a role and responsibility, which leads me to what implementation for research institutes look like. These are the things where we would expect to see moving forward, involvement being embedded in processes, in policies, in research strategies for institutions, and in the governance. So those areas of traction that relate to research where involvement can be embedded so it becomes part of the everyday practice. An intention to contribute to and showcase the integrity of research is important. We now have universities in WA that are demonstrating that involvement is an essential criteria for any grant application, which is at a national level, to ensure that the flow-on effect, if funded, that the research can have integrity, but also that the research across the university isn't compromised by not reinforcing the significance of involvement. A visible commitment to building capacity, as I said, that's for research office staff, that's for heads of schools in academia, for researchers and consumers, supporting that and making dollars available not only for training. It's all great and well to say you need to be trained, but if you can't, if institutions aren't providing opportunities for that to occur, that's important. Together with, as I had mentioned, it's been brilliant to see institutions, universities and research institutes and some funders available within WA and nationally, putting dollars and investment for their researchers to be able to use involvement to inform their research ideas, the development of their grants and co-design of implementation across the board. It's something that we know needs to occur, and it's a shared responsibility. It's not just for funders, it's also for research institutions and community organisations as well. They also have a role to play, and some institutes and universities are also putting funds to invest in having involvement coordinators based as part of their team available for their researchers to be able to seek support and guidance. Showcasing involvement is something that has been wonderful to see across institutions, where symposiums have a compulsory component of abstracts and presentations of recognising and showcasing involvement and co-presentation. Also in communications of demonstrating great projects where involvement is foundational to the work that is being done. And just to encourage you to seek guidance, you don't need to know how to do this all on your own. There is support available. And as I said, research officers at the Kids Curtin involved and the WAHTN CCI program are right here to be able to support you. And lastly, implementation for research funders is really important. So this is where there is an opportunity and again, an expectation. It is happening at a national level, both with MRFF and the NHMRC, where schemes are being changed as they are now being rolled out to mirror and reflect the roles and responsibilities, the values and the principles of the consumer statement. And that relates to the guidelines of grants, to the criteria, to the scoring matrix, where it might be 20% of the score is allocated according to what consumer and community involvement might look like, or more in some instances. Cancer Council, it can be 30, 35%. Assessment processes are changing as well, and membership of assessment panels. So the way in which consumer and community involvement is not only scored, but the way in which assessment panels and the finalisation of who is successful is being embedded. So that's a challenge, and also a future project for funders to be looking at their current processes and working out how they need to embrace and what that might look like over time. a commitment to building capacity for funding organisations in terms of staff and panel members, so that everybody understands what involvement should look like, and also then in terms of panel members, that they have the expertise and training and resources to be able to everybody be on the same page to understand what involvement needs to look like and how to reflect that in terms of scoring and the final assessment process. Again, resources becoming available, as Anne had mentioned, is something, it's a responsibility in terms of investment and funding being available for involvement to be part of the prioritisation, the ideation and the co-design for potential grant applications. The magic bucket of money does not exist, and so it is about future planning to ensure roles and responsibilities across the board are shared, and we are seeing some significant shifts and changes and hope to see more of that moving forward. And then showcasing involvement, what a brilliant opportunity for funders to be able to do this, to say, we not only fund great research, but this is what it looks like, and this is how involvement has been a part of things. For grant funders as well to be showcasing at events and symposiums the way in which they are embracing the statement is important. And again, you're not on your own. You don't have to work it out all out on your own. There is lots of help available and resources available, both through the Health Research Hub, but also WAHTN CCIProgram and Curtin Involve and the kids as well across the board. So they are the main very quick run through of the implementation things to take note of, depending on the hat or hats you might wear. Again, it's not an overnight rule that it needs to happen, but there is an expectation that this will be something that will be worked towards and will become more and more visible as the statement and the implementation of the statement occurs. Hopefully, I've been too busy speaking, which for those, again, who know me, I love to do that. We would love to take some of your questions. So please be putting those in the chat. I'm going to having the privilege to hand over to an amazing consumer, amazing person with lived experience, Sue Hayes. And Sue has been involved in so many different ways in informing and being involved as a research team member, as a person with amazing lived experience, but also a carer of people with lived experience as well. And it's a privilege to be able to hand all the power over to Sue to be able to bring some of the questions that we've been seeing that have been posed in the chat, to be able to work through some of those things. And if not, as well, Sue, I know you also potentially have some questions for Anne and I and or Steve about what we've been presenting and what that might look like in practice as well. So we've got a good number, about 20 minutes, just under 20 minutes for questions. So please take the opportunity for those who are online and attending. This is your opportunity to ask questions as well. So Sue, over to you.
Thank you very much, Deb, and good afternoon, everybody. This is a great opportunity for you to ask some very experienced people, with people like Anne, Deb, Steve online. So please don't hold back, put your questions in the chat. We've got a good few questions coming through already. One that has been posed that I think would be a great question that I would love to hear Anne respond to this one is, are there any examples of consumers and community in leadership roles and in what phases of a research project? Anne, would you like to give us some ideas of what you've seen over your time?
Sorry about that. I couldn't possibly do an online anything without being told you're on mute, Anne, so I'm being consistent. Look, I think increasingly across the country, we're seeing great examples of that, where consumers are leading the research. I think a couple of examples is one that came out of the ACT and New South Wales, and I know that the Perkins Institute were involved in it too, and that was McKenzie's mission, where a baby died from a genetic condition that the parents didn't know that they were carriers for, and their baby McKenzie, she only lived a few months. And so they lobbied every politician in New South Wales and the ACT. They wrote to every single politician and they lobbied the federal government. They got money to run that project. And now, as a result of that, there is free screening available to people across the country. So I think McKenzie's mission is a fabulous example of how, you know, tragedy can be turned into something really positive, and they've done that. And the Perkins Institute, Nigel Lang was very involved in that project, and you know, I'm sure they're all very proud of the results of it. Thank you.
And Sue, if I can also add to that, there's been an amazing project similar in a way and to the ones that you've mentioned in terms of there's a myositis research project at Murdoch Uni and Perrin, and they formed a consumer advisory group a number of years ago, and that consumer advisory group has continued to support. Initially, their job was to support the particular research project, but since then, that advisory group has gone on to identify symptoms that were never associated or known by researchers and clinicians to the condition of myositis, and that has then led to ongoing research, new research projects, and a change in clinical treatment as well. It's just because of all of those lived experiences of people being able to, in an advisory group, being able to talk about symptoms and things that they could see that weren't being researched and needed more of a focus, which then led the amazing research team led by Kelly Beer and Merrily Needham. It's been an amazing reflection of just how that involvement process can look. It's incredible.
Yeah, I'm really pleased to hear that, because you know, I was involved when that started, so it's very exciting to hear what's happening down the tracks with it.
And actually, some of those consumers on the advisory group have gone on to actually be consumer researchers. They're now running a research project, you know, with the help of Kelly's team at Murdoch. But they're the principal, they're the CIA, they're the principal lead researcher, that's amazing.
Well, we've got a couple of questions specifically about that, but just to lead into that, I'd like to ask a very good practical question that Megan has posed online. When putting together research teams, would you recommend that there is one person in the team whose main role is leading the consumer involvement, or should it be the role of the CI? Anne, would you like to comment on that?
Look, I think it's really important for consumers to have a specific person on the research team that provides the support and, you know, will help them work their way through being effective consumer and community members. It may not necessarily be CIA. I think, you know, as I said, when research teams are put together, you know, it needs to be someone's job. And what I've seen over the many years, if it's not a specific person's job, it then becomes anyone's and ultimately nobody's job. And people are left a little bit floundering. And it's okay with people if you've got consumers on your team like myself or like you, Sue. You know, that's very different to having, you know, someone who's new at it. So I think it's very important to have someone who's got a specific role for supporting and ensuring the consumers are able to make an effective contribution.
And it's been great to see.
To that, Sue?
Yes, Steve.
Which is that almost all research projects have some form of management or peak committee that takes overall responsibility for the research, and a consumer must be a member of that committee. Indeed, everything I'm associated with has a rule of a minimum of 2 consumers on that, because the consumers can support each other to ensure voices are heard.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and we've seen in a lot of research, which is great, in more grants and research applications, but then that are then funded, where if there are consumer advisory groups or a larger number of consumers, that there has been an allocation of a consumer and community involvement support officer specifically as part of their role. Sometimes that's a person with lived experience. Sometimes it's a researcher assistant who has the opportunity then to understand what accurate involvement looks like as an allocated role and a funded role, which I think, and it adds exactly as you've said, in terms of it's not a CIA is very, as the lead researcher, you don't want the consumer and or consumers to get lost in the busyness of the project. And so I think it's great to see that shift and change in the allocation, and as you've said, the specific roles and the expertise that people bring, but also that care and support, which is important. And whether or not that's just regular communication or honorariums or whatever it might look like, that the administration of a large research project is enormous. So it's good that it's now being recognised as an important aspect of good project management.
Yeah, and Sue, if I just might reinforce something that Steve said, it's very important to have more than one single voice. And particularly now we're seeing more lived experience researchers on teams, people coming forward and saying, well, I've got that condition. I think it's really important to actually widen the remit for consumers there and contact consumer organisations so that you get a cross set of, you get more than one perspective. And, so I think it's vital to have more than one person.
I think so. And I think I'm interested to see there's a message in the chat from Catherine Wolfe about being a consumer across a number of projects and institutions. And, I'm wondering if my involvement across so many is a negative, and look like, here she is again, oversaturation. Certainly that's a problem I think many of us have experienced. And I think that speaks to your point that, even if you do end up being the consumer on a research panel or a research grant application, you should at least insist there's 1 or 2 others, preferably even people you're bringing in as new consumer representatives, because we do need to grow the field. Otherwise, it's too easy to just keep grabbing for the familiar names, I think.
Yeah, I also think, Sue, I'm reminded of a story many years ago in Washington when the CEO of PCORI, Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute, big organisation set up by Obama and fortunately still running. The CEO said to me, oh, you're very professional, Anne. And so I thought about it overnight and I went back to him and said, hey, have you ever said to a doctor or a nurse, you're too professional? So please don't say it to me, because I want to be the most professional consumer rep you've ever had. So I think consumers need to remember that your lived experience makes you a professional in your area. So it reminded me of that. Don't ever think someone can be on too many committees or too professional.
Absolutely. Every project, Steve Mutze has had a comment here. Every project will have a different amount of consumer involvement, especially at the implementation stage. For example, in the case of basic or discovery research, with more and more funders scoring the consumer involvement, is it going to negatively impact basic research getting funded when it may be difficult to expect consumers to follow all the research? I think that ties into another comment further back about making a commitment to not talking in acronyms and terminology. Yes, Anne, would you like to comment on that?
Look, Stephen, I really would say to you, fear not. If I have a condition and I know that it's being looked at in a lab, I am your big supporter. You need to tap into me because I am your advocate. Even if I don't have a clue what it is you're doing, I know that ultimately what you do is hopefully going to make a difference to me, my family. So I don't think it's going to negatively impact. I am the consumer person on the Frontiers Grant committee, and honestly, me and Google, we're best friends when I'm reviewing those applications because most of what is applied for I don't understand, but I do understand if the consumer voice is there and integral to what you are planning to study. So I don't think you need to worry about the fake news that's called about buddies and everybody's going to have panels, because I don't think it's true. And I think you just need to look at a way to involve consumers in your research. Like Deb said, one size doesn't fit all. And I believe that each research project is very unique, and therefore the involvement activity should be unique as well. So I think you can be, reassured, Stephen.
Absolutely.
And we're also seeing, Stephen, in the 2025 clinical trials and cohort study through NHMRC, that assessment process changed in terms of the number of consumers on that panel, but also the process of assessment involving consumers. Consumers aren't on a panel to become an overnight scientist. That is not their job. They're there to bring their expertise of knowledge of what should involvement look like in this particular project. That's what they're scoring. That's what the matrix relates to. So I think there is a general nervousness and an impractical thinking that sometimes consumers think of themselves as becoming an overnight scientist. That is not their job, and it is more and more now reinforced through funding assessment panels of what the roles and responsibilities of everybody on the panel, not just the scientific experts, but the health and medical research experts, but also the consumer and community reviewers as well. So, the clinical trials and cohorts study is going through an assessment process now, and it's been an amazing process to see the shifts and the changes of now it's about what you see the whole application, so that you can understand and you expect to see the full story from the first page of the application all the way through to the last, not just the consumer and community involvement section. And that's often, a trap for researchers putting their applications together. But the expertise that the consumer is there for is to bring their lived experience of what involvement should look like. Is it there? The methodology, but also the capacity of the team. And where you name a consumer as a team member, you need to not just have that they're a consumer, you need to indicate what their expertise is as part of the team. As Anne has mentioned, and Sue has been involved as a consumer team member for lots of discovery research projects where her expertise is recognised for what she brings, not just an add-on as a CI or an AI as a tick the box. So be encouraged.
I also think you could look to the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, who've started their buddy program in 2014-15, and they've morphed that into a big thing. They've got over 100 consumer and community members on projects across there, and I've got to say, I don't think their funding's gone down. So I think they're a good example of what can be done.
So if I can just add something very quickly in relation to discovery science, I don't think there's any desire or intention that the technical aspects of experiments that might be occurring in cells or in some other in vitro way are needing direct consumer involvement. But consumers can and must be involved in the research strategy, in understanding its goals, its pathway to impact, And I would suggest that researchers across all disciplines, from discovery to implementation, will be better and more effective as a consequence of the experience associated with being able to communicate effectively to people without technical knowledge.
Absolutely. And I think that this is a critical aspect, actually, of the consumer involvement with a research team. One of the teams that I'm very involved with, which is very much deep fundamental research, they take it as the opportunity when they meet with me that the more junior researchers have to present what they're doing in their research, because it's an opportunity to learn those skills of communicating in plain language and being able to explain ultimately what the end result of this research might be. As a result of that, that lab has actually shifted its direction of research into an area that will have earlier clinical application, which has improved their grant application process. They've been much more successful in getting grants. So it's an interesting shift. And I think that's very important. There are a couple of questions just to cover quickly, which are very much about involving consumers as CIs or AIs in grant applications, or also alternatively a consumer group as the CI or AI. Personally, I can't say I've seen that, but certainly individuals. And also what kind of support there might be for consumers as CIs on grants to enter their CV in Sapphire. Anne, have you had any experience?
Yeah, you can enter it in, and the things that are not applicable, you just put not applicable, and it's fine. You don't need to get too caught up about it. But NHMRC does provide support. It's a very unfriendly process, and I'm constantly telling them that, but I don't know that they're actually listening to me, but it is.
Sapphire's will undergo a review.
I was just going to say, it is being reviewed at the moment, so maybe we'll see some changes.
We've been both yelling and screaming and loud enough, which is a good thing. So with the statement coming out, Sapphire will undergo so that embedding the expertise that researchers know is there with their CIs and AIs, with people with lived experience, it can occur, which is great. So yeah. Thanks, Sue.
No, that's really good.
Yes. So I was just going to say, there is a question in there about data collections, and I just want to remind everybody that the role at UWA and the Kids Institute started in the mid-90s about data linkage. So like the labs, it doesn't have to be for a specific disease or a specific condition. It can be broad population stuff, and it's exactly the same. So Varuna, I think, put that in. I just wanted to reassure you that the processes are applicable to data collections, retrospective data collections, linked data, whatever. So I thought that was an important point. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's good.
All right, we're nearly out of time.
We're nearly out of time. Can I put through one last little question? Are there any resources to help consumers upskill as co-authors and co-presenters? Because I would say this is a new space for a lot of us. Deb, do you have any comment on this?
Yep, we're in the process of writing a new tailored training process. There are some on the hub, on the Health Research Hub. There are some good resources to look for as well. And I know Anne does a lot of training and involvement in this space as well. Curtin Crest, the course that they run is about research. There is an element of Curtin Crest about what co-authorship can look like as well. So so there are some around. You need to do your research to find them, but I'm happy to come to us, and we'll direct you to all the people who can help you.
That's great. Thank you. I think that's all the questions we can fit in today, but any questions that we haven't answered, there will be a Q&A sheet put out to address the resolution of any of those. So if we haven't managed to get to you, I do apologise, but don't despair, you will get an answer. Thank you.
Over to you, Steve.
Thank you for all who've attended today. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Anne, for your presentations. And such important messages that have now been disseminated very effectively. Thank you very much.
Thank you.